By 2:30 p.m., the wind at Fort Crowley was biting harder than usual. It came in from the west, dry and unrelenting, sweeping across the wide plateau like it had a personal grudge. Heat shimmered off the gravel, turning the horizon into a blur. Dust settled on every surface. Brass casings sparkled under the sun, half buried in the dirt. Downrange, the steel targets at 1,600 yards sat still, untouched, quiet. A line of sniper candidates lay prone behind their rifles, stretched out in the gravel, with their faces pressed to scopes. The rifles were modern, sleek, equipped with precision optics and smart systems. Tablets buzzed beside them, running ballistic solvers and wind calculators. Every piece of gear had a purpose. Every number mattered. But not a single shot had landed. Rounds cracked in steady rhythm, one after another. Each report punched the air with confidence, followed by silence. No ring, no swing of steel, just dead air and the soft rustle of the wind teasing through the sagebrush. The mood had shifted. Earlier in the day, there had been quiet jokes, confident nods, a few grins behind mirrored lenses. But after dozens of failed shots, the atmosphere had thickened into something heavier. Fatigue mixed with pride. Sweat clung beneath their uniforms. Fingers tremble, not from fear, but from the weight of expectations. Staff Sergeant Kyle Riker walked the line, arms folded tight across his chest. He was sharp-edged, built like stone, and not one for small talk. He stopped behind each shooter, scanning the data on their screens. Then the target, then the wind flags whipping at midpoint. His jaw clenched tighter each time a shot missed. He trusted the process. Trust the solver. Trust the numbers. Trust the training. But the results weren't matching up, and it was eating at him. Behind them, near the edge of the pad, a woman swept gravel from the firing path. Her movements were slow, steady, rhythmic. She didn't speak. Her boots were worn smooth, her ball cap sun-bleached to a shade somewhere between gray and nothing. She didn't make noise, didn't interrupt, just kept moving. Claire Maddox. No one said her name out loud. Most of the candidates didn't know it. They saw her, maybe, in the same way they saw the storage sheds or the empty shell casings' background details. Just part of the range. She didn't wear rank, didn't carry a radio, just a broom and a small notepad tucked into her back pocket. A few of the older instructors gave her a nod when they passed, but even they didn't linger. She paused once, eyes fixed on the horizon, not on the flags flapping wildly near the berms, but on the shimmer low to the ground, just above the rocks. A subtle wave in the air that looked like heat but meant something more to those who knew how to read it. She tilted her head slightly, as if the wind had whispered something only she could hear. The shots continued, the misses stacked higher, and somewhere behind them, the woman with the broom swept in silence, unnoticed by most. But she watched everything. The wind, the dust, the shooters. She had time. They didn't know it yet, but she was waiting. Claire Maddox moved like part of the wind itself. Quiet, steady, always there, but never noticed unless you looked for her. Most people didn't. On that wide gravel range at Fort Crowley, surrounded by noise, tension, and missed targets, she was just the woman with the broom, nothing more. Her hat sat low, a sun-bleached ball cap, so worn it had lost its original color. Her shirt was faded and long-sleeved, rolled up just enough to show the corner of an old tattoo on her left wrist. An owl feather, thin lines, black ink, almost washed out against skin browned by years under desert sun. The kind of tattoo that wasn't meant for show, just memory. Her boots didn't shine, but they were clean, not polished for ceremony. just kept with the quiet care of someone who knew what they were worth. They moved with purpose, across gravel, between target stands, beside the racks where brass piled up like autumn leaves. She swept, refilled sandbags, tightened, torn down target lines. She carried a small toolkit in her back pocket. The handle of a screwdriver stuck out beside a rolled length of paracord, held together with tape. Nothing flashy, everything functional. To the younger candidates, she was background, not a trainer, not a shooter, just someone who passed behind them without a word. They didn't see how her eyes tracked the wind flags for more than a glance, how she paused near the 800-yard line to study the shimmer, the mirage rising like heat snakes off the rock shelf, how she watched the dust trails from each missed round and tilted her head slightly, as if measuring something no one else noticed. She never corrected anyone, never offered a word, unless spoken to, but the way she moved said she knew things they hadn't learned yet. And a few of the older instructors, the ones with creased faces and tight knees, gave her short nods when they passed. Not friendly, not casual, just enough to say they remembered. Claire didn't seek attention. She didn't need it. Her presence was felt more than seen, like the shift in air before a storm, like the silence between heartbeats. She was the kind of person most forgot to look at until it was too late. And for now, that suited her just fine. The line was slipping. Shots kept missing. Steel at 1,600 yards stayed silent. And the air around the candidates grew heavier with every failed attempt. Fingers gripped stocks harder. Breaths grew shorter. The sun didn't ease up either. By 3:15 p.m., the heat pressed down on them like a weight no one could shrug off. Private First-Class Mason lay behind his rifle, face flushed. He'd run the numbers 3 times, double-checked his app, adjusted for the crosswind, showing at the midpoint flags. Still nothing. No ping. No dust splash close enough to call progress. He sat up, muttered under his breath, then nudged the guy next to him. "Maybe we ought to ask the janitor," he said. "She's been out here longer than us. Probably knows the wind better, too." A couple of the others chuckled. Not mean laughter, just the kind that slips out when nerves and ego start to crack. Another voice chimed in, louder this time. "Yeah, I bet she's tracked more dust devils than our scopes." The laugh spread further this time. Heads lifted. Eyes glanced back at the edge of the range where Claire was sweeping the gravel near the ammo shed. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, just kept moving the broom in steady arcs. Same pace as before, but after a pause, she looked up. Her voice was soft, not loud enough to cut through the wind, but just enough to carry. "You're reading the flags. That's not where the wind's talking." That was it. Just a few words. Calm. Low. Certain. She nodded once toward the shimmer rising off the rocks near the 800-yard line. The mirage curved in patterns the candidates hadn't even looked at. Not once. Claire went back to sweeping like the conversation never happened. Riker heard it. He turned fast. Boots grinding into the gravel. His face stayed tight. His tone sharper than any echo on the range. "That's enough. Ma'am, this line doesn't take outside input. Let the instructors handle instruction." Claire didn't argue. She gave a slight nod and stepped back, broom still in hand. But something had shifted. The laughter faded fast. Nobody looked at Riker. They looked at her. For the first time all day, more than one candidate started wondering who she really was. Not a joke. Not background. Something else. Something they hadn't seen coming. Mason didn't mean to stop. He was just heading for the water cooler near the trucks, trying to shake the pressure off his shoulders. His head was pounding. His shirt stuck to his back. The wind hadn't let up since noon, and the taste of dust was permanent now. But as he walked past the rusted blue pickup parked near the edge of the range, something pulled at the corner of his vision. The truck wasn't much. Paint peeling. One of the taillights taped Tires Halfbald. It looked like it belonged to the land itself. But in the bed, tucked under a loosely thrown tarp, sat a rifle case. Not just any case. This one had history. Mason slowed down. The case was long, rectangular, and olive green. Metal edges scuffed silver. The latches dulled from repeated use. Not disrepair. Scratches crisscrossed the surface in chaotic layers, and the corners were rounded from years of being slammed into steel and stone. He'd seen cases like that before. In briefing slides, deployment footage, field manuals, the kind of case that came out of Chinooks, that slid across Humvee beds in the middle of nowhere. That wasn't a cleaning crew rifle case. He looked again. Closer. No name on it. Just a small frayed tag hanging from one corner. He didn't open it. Didn't touch. But something inside him shifted. When he turned back, Claire was standing by the edge of the ammo shed. Notebook in hand. Not a clipboard. Not a maintenance log. This was different. Faded black cover. Taped at the spine. Pages curled from where? She flipped it open. Pencil tapping as she reviewed some tight, handwritten lines. Not printed checklists. Actual data. He stepped closer. Just enough to glimpse what she held. Tiny arrows marked wind drift. Mill adjustments. Yardage notes. Quick math and margins. And then he saw it on the inside of the back cover. Sealed under a layer of scratched plastic. A photo. Claire stood in uniform. Younger. Face sharp and sunburned. Next to her, a tall man grinned with an arm over her shoulders. Behind them, the dusty ridgeline of what had to be Afghanistan. They were both armed, dirty, alive. Mason didn't say a word. Not right then. But when he walked back to the line, his eyes didn't go to his scope. They went to Claire. And when one of the others asked what took him so long, he leaned in and whispered, "Before o'clock." The mood had changed. Not completely, but enough. They still didn't know who she was. But now, they were starting to wonder. By 4:30 p.m., the line was quiet in a different way. The usual muttering about wind calls and reticle holds had faded. Now, there were sideways glances. Subtle ones. From scopes to Claire. From Claire, back to the line. Riker noticed it. Have felt it. That slight shift in focus. Like gravity pulling just a little to the left. He hated it. He stood near the range flag. Arms crossed tight. Watching the group with narrowed eyes. They weren't laughing anymore. But they weren't locked in either. And worse, they were starting to wonder. About her. About the broom woman who moved like wind wasn't just something to measure, but something she understood down to its bones. He heard the whisper, barely. One of the candidates, maybe Mason, said something about how maybe she wasn't wrong. About the shimmer. About the dust. Riker's jaw clenched. He turned. So? If you've got the answers. Mum, maybe you'd like to take the shot yourself. His voice was flat. Not raised, but sharp. The kind of tone that cuts deeper than yelling. He wasn't joking. And he wasn't asking. Claire looked at him. Not startled. Just steady. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward Mason. She knelt beside him. Slow. Deliberate. Like the gravel didn't even crunch under her knees. Her hands didn't rush. She tucked his elbow tighter, shifted his shoulder just enough, tilted his scope. Then she tapped near his trigger guard. Breathe slow. Let it fall out of your lungs. Her voice wasn't louder than the wind, but it carried. Riker said nothing. He stood still. Arms folded tighter now, watching her with a stare that didn't blink. His authority hadn't been taken, but it wasn't untouched either. Something had changed. and everyone on the line could feel it. The wind had dipped just enough for the mirage to stretch long and thin across the rocks at the 800-yard mark. Everything felt still. Not quiet. Exactly. Just suspended. The way the air holds before a storm. Mason lay, prone again. But this time his hands didn't shake. Claire was beside him. Not in charge. Not commanding. Just present. Forget the app, she told him softly. Watch the shimmer. Above the third ridge rock. Just past the dark patch of soil. That's where the crosswind flattens out. He didn't question. He didn't blink. He followed her voice. Low and grounded like it had been spoken 100 times before, in 100 different places. She nudged his elbow slightly in, shifted his stock angle, tapped once near his cheek weld. Looser. Just a bit. Let your bones carry the weight, not your muscles. Mason exhaled. One steady breath. The kind you don't think about. Just let go. Claire said nothing for a moment. Then, in a voice that cut through the air more cleanly than any range command, she said now. He broke the shot. The rifle cracked sharp and clean. The sound echoed out across the range, and for a half breath, nothing came back. Then, a second later, a distant ring. Steel. Hit. A perfect tone. Not a glance. Not a graze. Dead center. The entire line froze. No cheers. No claps. Just heads lifting slowly from scopes. Eyes wide. Mouths just slightly open. The range hadn't made that sound all day. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Claire stood, brushed dust from her knee, looked down at Mason, and nodded once. See, she said. Dirt doesn't lie. Then she turned and walked back toward the broom, leaning against the ammo shed. And no one knew what to say. But none of them would forget it. The range was still holding its breath when the sound of boots came from behind the firing line. Not the hurried stomp of a drill sergeant, or the tired drag of a private. These were clean, measured steps, deliberate. And when the figure came into view, no one needed an introduction. Colonel Ernest Beck didn't raise his voice when he arrived. He didn't have to, even at 5:15 p.m. With the sun low and hot on the gravel. The moment he stepped past the last firing bench, the line straightened. His presence carried weight, a quiet authority built over decades. He scanned the targets first, then looked toward the ammo shed. His eyes caught Claire, and everything about him shifted. He stopped walking, just stood there for a second, then nodded to her like a soldier greeting another across a battlefield. Claire. That's all he said. But the word wasn't casual. It was filled with something deeper. Memory. Gratitude. Respect. He turned to the candidates. Most of them still crouched beside their rifles, unsure if they were supposed to stand or stay frozen. Beck looked at each of them slowly. Then he spoke. You boys don't know who's been sweeping your gravel. The voice wasn't harsh. It was steady. The kind that wraps around a story before it begins. Years ago, in the northeastern mountains of Afghanistan, Claire Maddox wore a different uniform, wore it in dust and fire, taught snipers how to read the land like it breathed. They called her Owl back then, not because she hunted at night, but because she saw things nobody else could. Wind off rock, mirage abends, the way dust lifted before an ambush. He stepped forward, hand on his belt. There was a mission. Firebase crimson. Storm rolled in fast. Radios were down. Visibility was maybe 5 feet. We had 23 men pinned and 0 eyes on target. And Claire, he paused. She walked through it like it was Sunday morning. Called shots without optics. She watched the way the dust curled over the ridgeline and corrected fire by sound. Not sight. Just wind and instinct. And it worked. The silence on the line deepened. No one fidgeted. No one spoke. She saved every damn one of us. Beck looked back at her, She hadn't moved, still holding that broom, like it was nothing more than a handle and a head of bristles. Not the woman who once guided fire through a storm. And she never told you. That's how you know it's true. He turned, started walking back the way he came. Now you know the name behind the broom. Not a single candidate made eye contact with her. Not out of shame. Out of something heavier. Reverence. The kind that doesn't ask questions. The kind that starts in silence and stays there. The moment Colonel Beck's story ended, silence settled like dust over the range. No one moved. No one dared to break it. The air felt thicker. The wind slower. As if the desert itself was holding its breath. Then Beck turned. His voice calm but commanding. Let them see it. Claire didn't nod. Didn't hesitate. She simply leaned the broom against the ammo shed and walked toward the old blue pickup like she'd done it 1,000 times. This time, though, all eyes followed her. She flipped back the tarp and reached in. What came out wasn't shiny or new. It was a beat-up M24 sniper rifle. The stock dull with age, sling frayed where leather met metal. The bolt had that soft scrape of too many missions. Too many corrections made by instinct alone. She held it like a part of her body. Not an object. Not a prop. Something earned. She walked past the line and dropped prone on bare gravel. No mat. No padding. Just rock and dust beneath her. She pulled the sling tight, settled in, and adjusted the scope. Her hands moved without rush. Without a single wasted gesture. The candidates didn't speak. Even the wind seemed to soften. She watched the range. Then the shimmer. The flag was wrong again. She didn't look at it. She called her hold out loud. Her voice low but sure. Left. Savin' Mills. She breathed in. Let it fall out. The shot cracked. A single clean report. Half a second later, the 1,600-yard steel rang so sharp and perfect, it might as well have been a bell at sunrise. The sound echoed off the ridges. Then the range came alive. A burst of applause. Some cheers. A couple of the younger guys blinked hard and looked away. Mason grinned, but his chest felt tight. Evan Riker stood still, jaw clenched, and gave the smallest of nods. Not defeat. Respect. Claire stood slowly, cleared the chamber, slid the bolt home, and walked the rifle back to her truck. She placed it in the case, laced the straps, then picked up the broom again. No bow, no speech, no victory smile. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to remind them. Sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes it wears dust and walks on silent boots. The echoes of the shot had barely faded when the noise rolled in. Applause. Cheers. A few stunned voices breaking through, trying to find the right words. But they didn't last. The excitement rose, crested, and fell again, like wind shifting over tall grass. And when the last sound slipped away, Claire was already clearing the rifle. She worked in silence, pulled the bolt, checked the chamber. No rush, no nerves. Just the same quiet rhythm she'd used all day with the broom. She tucked the rifle back into its worn case, cinched the straps, and slid it into the bed of her truck beneath the old tarp. Then she turned, picked up the broom again, and started sweeping the gravel, the exact same way she had that morning. Nothing about her had changed, but everything around her had. Mason stood still for a while, then walked over. His voice was low when he spoke. "Thank you." Claire didn't look up, just swept a patch of loose dust near the firing bench and said she was only here to keep the range clean. The rest, she said, was up to them. He didn't press her, just nodded once and stepped away. Staff Sergeant Riker stayed silent longer than anyone. Then, standing in front of the candidates, his voice broke the hush. Respect doesn't always wear rank. He paused. Sometimes it comes in the form of boots that have already walked the hard ground. You don't need a ribbon for that. Just the eyes to see it. No one spoke. No one laughed. There were no more jokes. No more looks passed behind backs. Just the soft scrape of a broom across gravel and the weight of something learned too late to say out loud. Claire didn't wait for acknowledgement. She didn't look back. She just walked toward her truck. The Wyoming sky stretching wide behind her. Her broom resting over one shoulder like it had always been there. And maybe that was the last lesson. Not the shot. Not the story. But the way a legend can walk past you for years, sweeping dust in silence, waiting for you to notice.